My name is Kycell and my work on the first entry of the Forgotten Minotaur King is drawing to a close. But my close friend and private bodyguard, Myrink, still needs to be found before I can continue the next leg of my journey. My ally and ghostwriter along my journey, Ahani paced the floor of our host's dormitory thoroughly enough to wear grooves into the carpet. Estelise, the wolfish Rougarou nurse, fortunately stayed to attend Myrink, who was progressing in his recovery at a rapid rate, and would be able to return to his home and pack for his and his son's departure in the morning. The serpentine Lamia doctor, Psychosyllabin, looked on at the worrying half-dwarf with understanding and concern.
I am sure your friend will be fine. Didn't you say she was a trained bodyguard? I'm sure she will return tonight, if not tomorrow morning.
Ahani just stared into Psycho's bright yellow and slit-pupiled eyes with a look of strained unease. I simply stood off to the side of the dorm, counting and collecting my belongings, the dozens of notebooks filled with my and Krunturg's adventures up to this very point, the scrolls I collected from Carnager's secret room, some robes and traveling food for our journey to the port town, and the copious bags of coins I earned during my short occupation at the Mindas Castle library. As I looked over the scrolls, the image of Lord Carnager's desiccated corpse strewn among the bookshelves flooded my mind. I wish that hadn't been necessary, but Lieutenant Valouen acted so fast I had no time to react, and I'm not sure who I would have assisted if I had intervened. I looked over to Ahani and Myrink's belongings. Nothing was packed for our continued journey. Ahani made it perfectly clear she wouldn't prepare to leave until Myrink was recovered. I agreed, but that would have meant putting both of us into harm's way once again. She simply stood her ground and demanded we did whatever was necessary. Ahani reminded me that neither of our positions at the castle had been directly compromised in the attack. She was seen leaving the foundry with Carnager before he died, and I would have seemingly been kidnapped from the library, along with my co-worker Chinook, despite him actually being kidnapped and currently held prisoner by Valouen and his forces. The idea she then pitched was for us to return to the castle in the morning, and if any guards or, God forbid, higher-ups like the Regent Mother or Fugazi questioned us, we could claim to have been taken prisoner and escaped, then be left free to inquire after Myrink. I still wanted to simply wait for her, but Ahani was strangely determined. I suppose Myrink and her had grown far closer over the course of this harrowing adventure than she and I, or even Myrink and myself. I agreed, but tomorrow morning I needed to speak with Valouen, Soiree, Myrink's sister, and Chinook before we left. Ahani agreed. Armed with only my scholar's robes and a bag for notepads and scrolls, we approached the Palamedes University for what felt like the final time. As was routine, we walked through the side entrance that led to the students' practice rooms, and, as always, we passed room after room until we came upon the one Psyche had quartered off for kind. As we opened the door, we were greeted by a fully armed and armored Minotaur. He stood at least 8 feet tall with a considerable horn span, cord-blessed sword and hammer strapped to his back, and baby Bjorn, complete with cooing calf across his leather-armored chest. Merkind met me and Ahani with a glowing smile. All the casts, bandages, and ointment patches seemingly had been removed, but the horn that Fugazi had wrenched from his head still had a rather intimidating metal band wrapped around it.
Well, I'll be. I figure you'd be halfway to Skullamondra Port by sunrise. Me and the lad stopped by the house to get more gear, and the little fella's toys, of course, before we head north. Hear that little Rakshasa princeling named the settlement after himself, Jadenis Town. Can't wait to get my hands on that cat bastard.
He scooted around us and hefted several backpacks and duffel bags under each arm. Estelise was hurriedly stuffing spare medical supplies into the final one he hoisted over his shoulder. I hurriedly ran to the mayor, who had been an incredible source for my work. I would have had virtually nothing to follow on Krunterg had it not been for him, and I knew I would need to track him down again if and when the Rospo leads in the port city dried up. Giving his bulky frame an embrace like I hadn't since I was a little kid and my parents returned from some meeting in Mindas Castle, he patted me on the head, the gesture of a caring father. Ahani quickly joined. Estelise even looked to possibly consider joining for a moment. We broke the hug and I thanked him for everything.
I wish I could keep you safe down at that port. Those Rospo are bigger backstabbers than the Brajelasad family all put together. I don't trust them, and whatever you do, don't ask them for any favors. You go get that Myrink girl. She had a good head on her shoulders, and I think she'd be able to keep you two out of trouble.
Again, Ahani looked downtrodden, but nodded in agreement. Kind made his way to the doorway, with us shortly behind him. He left towards the entrance, and we went further into the school to meet Velwen, and none of us looked back. We entered the makeshift headquarters for the Morongo Knights during their stay in Goldenarad, which, it turns out, was a former fraternity house the Knights managed to co-opt by offering the collegiate brothers lofty titles and careers in their home country of Androne upon the completion of their mission. The house was in general disrepair, complete with ramshackle furniture and long-abandoned ale mugs all across the floors. However, a large gathering of knights lined the fences of the front yard in greater number than I had expected. We entered and were greeted by the long mustached face of the knight that Myrink had addressed the day prior to the attack, and the one that she was meant to meet up with after the attack, Captain Alicio. He gestured for us to enter the lieutenant's interior sanctum, the frat president's master bedroom. As we entered, we passed a room blocked by several heavily muscled guards. In the center was a cage with a very familiar red-skinned draconid shouting for release, referring to the knights in various esoteric insults and spraying small plumes of fire. I reminded myself to make sure that Velwen didn't mistreat Chinook, despite his aggressive and condescending personality. We then entered Velwen's chambers, and as Alicio stepped away from our group, he entered an adjacent room I deduced was a lavatory. As another knight, female, human, and adorned in armor seemingly equal in rank to Alicio, was vomiting what looked like copious amounts of blood into a toilet. Valwen approached us, shining sharp armor glistening, noting both Ahani and I had seen the female knight.
Captain Galen is having some difficulty recovering from her battle with the vampire and his minions, but we are doing everything in our power to assure she returns to fighting ship. Monsieur Axur and his wife are resting from this horrific endeavor in their bedrooms down the hall. I still have yet to tell them that the rescuer was her sister. I assume that is what you were visiting about?
Ahani was the one to approach him first. I still felt deep shame for failing my end of the infiltration scheme. She asked if Soiree or Perna had said anything further about Myrink during the attack. He simply replied that she killed at least 4 half-orcs and severely wounded 2 massive ogres, as well as the captain of the guard that seemed to recognize her. The last thing they saw was her shooting him grappling her, and neither giving chase after that. We both grew increasingly dejected at this news, but we internally braced ourselves to return to the castle, praying that our alibis held.
My men and I are leaving for Manchen this afternoon. I believe you and us are heading to the same port city. I suggest you hurry whatever business you have in Goldenarad. In case you forgot, the moment the Rejalasad are finished shoveling up that debris, they are raiding this university, looking for us. So I hope you can join us for our departure.
He returned to organizing gear and papers for his exodus to Scalamandri. The thought of extra aid filled me with a little well-being, but the concern for Saika and Esteliz should the Rajal Assad and Paga's forces descend upon them once again disturbed me. As I prepared to inquire after Chinook's safety, Valwen spoke up again, light concern across his face.
Oh, and I just received even worse news. It seems the castle had some visitors early this morning. It was a large coach marked with the Levry de Chair insignia. I believe they're the mercenary and assassins guild your friend Myrink was trained with. The elf au pair Perna said the Rajal Assad had requested them and their aid some time ago. It seems they arrived sooner than expected.
With a shared look of panic, Ahani and I fled the fraternity from Mindas Castle and this new and incredibly dangerous problem.
Hi, my name is Matthew Lewis, and I do the voice of Kycell along with all the additional voices in The Forgotten Minotaur King. I hope you enjoy the podcast and continue to listen into the future. If you want to support my content, please donate to my Patreon, Matthew Lewis Podcasts. Subscribe to my YouTube channel, Matthew Lewis Podcasts, all one word. Follow me on Twitter at Matthew Lewis P. Or leave a positive maximum star review on your podcast app of choice. If you found this podcast, I assume you're familiar enough with the genre to know how important reviews are to the survival of a channel. And I hope you recommend this to your friends. Or if you didn't like it, you could recommend it to your enemies, and I'll teach them a lesson. Keep it sleazy, folks, and thank you.